Right, you can see from the bottom of your screen is the news that we had anticipated. Nottingham Forest have been deducted 4 points following a breach of the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. As Carve was telling us, an independent commission had applied an immediate 4-point deduction to Nottingham Forest for their breach of their profit and sustainability rules for the period ending season 2022-23. This is now on the Premier League's websites. They say that they were referred to an independent commission on 15th of January following an admission by the club that it had breached the relevant PSR threshold of £61 million by £34.5 million. The threshold was lower, as again, Carve was explaining that it was lower for them because they were 2 seasons in the Championship. They go on to say the case was heard in accordance with new Premier League rules, which provide an expedited timetable for PSR cases to be resolved in the same season as the complaint is issued. Now, I'm delighted to say that Carve Solokol is alongside me. So, Carve, it's what was expected, not what Nottingham Forest fans will want to hear, that they are 4 points now worse off. They will drop into the relegation zone as a result. But I guess it's potentially what we'd anticipated.
Yes, we were expecting them to get a 4-point deduction. What I'm specifically interested in is how big the breach was. Because if you remember, Everton's breach was £19.5 million. And initially they got hit with a 10-point deduction. Now, in the statement we've just had from the Premier League, it says that Nottingham Forest's breach was £34.5 million.
Substantially more.
So it is substantially more than Everton's breach was, yet they have been hit with a deduction which is less than Everton's initial 10-point deduction. They're only getting 4-point deduction. So people will be asking, why are they only getting a 4-point deduction? And in this statement, the Premier League say that Nottingham Forest basically cooperated fully during the whole case from beginning to end. So I am thinking now, is that one of the reasons why they have been dealt with relatively leniently compared to how Everton were dealt with to begin with? But the Premier League have also provided the full written reasons. It's just dropped here on my phone. It's 52 pages. I'm going to have to go away and read that and come back to you.
Yeah, let's not sub that as we go.
That's my initial reaction, is £34.5 million breach. You're getting 4 points, whereas Everton, £19.5 million, they got 10 points to begin with.
So that said, and again, I know this isn't something that you can sort of guess on it, but that said, the fact that Everton were deducted 10 points for what you say, this 19 million, this is reduced to 4 points. Do you feel, even if they do appeal, because this is what Forest fans are going to want to know, will they get anywhere? Do you feel this is probably as lenient as they can possibly go? Well,
let's stick to the facts. The facts are that they've got 7 days to decide whether they want to appeal or not. A lot of people would think it's a no-brainer. Everton got it reduced from 10 to 6 points. Give it a go. What have you got to lose? A couple of £1,000, perhaps. But, you know, you've obviously shown that you've got a lot of money to spend because you've breached the rules by £34.5 million anyway. So roll the dice again, have another go. A new 3-person panel will hear that appeal. The only thing is, at an appeal, you can't introduce any new evidence.
Right.
You can basically just argue your case again and hope for the best. And Nottingham Forest have already held their hands up and admitted that they've broken the rules. So I think this is what they need to sort out very, very quickly, because they've only got 7 days to decide whether to appeal or not, whether they want to appeal or take this punishment on the chin. Because I think from a football point of view, there may be people within Nottingham Forest who might be saying, this cloud has been hanging over us for a long, long time. Let's just take the 4 points. We know what we need to do to stay up. We're 1 point below Luton now. We've still got, 9 games to play. There's some big, big games. We've got the squad to be able to stay in the Premier League because of our performances on the pitch. This has been too much of a distraction. So I think those are the kind of conversations people will be having at Nottingham Forest, because it's a big decision that they need to take, whether to appeal or not.
We'll have a look at the Premier League table in just a second. But first of all, Covey, again, I'm asking you questions that I'm sort of putting to you. You might not know the answers to, but I'm going to give it a go. Do you think the fact that they were in the Championship for those 2 years has also played a big part of this, in terms of the fact that it is more than Everton, but because they were in the Championship, they've been allowed that in terms of they can lose more?
Well, in Everton's case, because Everton, during the whole reporting 3-year period, they're a Premier League club, they were allowed to lose a maximum of £105 million. Now, Nottingham Forest, for 2 of the 3 seasons of the reporting period, were in the Championship. So they were only allowed to lose a maximum of £61 million. Now, the statement from the Premier League we've just had said that in the hearing, Nottingham Forest made arguments in their defence, came up with mitigating factors. So there was more than one. Yeah. And I think one of the things they would have argued was, look, we were promoted very, very late in the summer because we came up through the playoffs. Yep. We had a lot of players in our squad who were on loan. They went back to their parent clubs. We needed to spend money very, very quickly to make sure we had a squad that was competitive enough to stay in the Premier League. That is why we spent something like £150 million on 22 players. And guess what? It worked, because we did manage to stay in the Premier League. We avoided relegation. We didn't want to be a yo-yo club. So I think that is something else that they would have argued. I'm sure they would have argued the whole Brennan Johnson issue that we've talked about so much in the last few days as well. But it's interesting that the Premier League statement uses the plural, mitigating factors. So obviously Nottingham Forest had more than just one argument that they came up with in their defence. Yeah, and it's quite interesting to think that it was £34.5 million, which I think that's something that's quite a shock. I think a lot of us might have expected that it would have been lower than 19 million. Well, actually, what it does tell us is that if they had sold Brennan Johnson for £35 million to Brentford, which potentially they could have done that, and because Brennan Johnson was a homegrown player, that £35 million would have gone straight into their accounts, and that would have cleared the potential breach of £34.5 million. So they should have been in the clear. But what Nottingham Forest would say is, why should we sell one, if not our best player, on the cheap? Because we didn't sell him. The cut-off date was the 30th of June for our accounts. We could have sold him before then and been in the clear as far as these rules were concerned, but we didn't want to sell him on the cheap. We waited another 2 months. In actual fact, we sold him to Spurs for £47.5 million. So it made business sense to keep hold of him and wait for a better offer, but obviously it didn't make sense from the point of view of complying with the Premier League spending rules. Yeah, and the bottom line is they weren't complying with the rules. Let's just take a look at the table then, because this is what it'll mean now then in terms of everyone else. They drop into the relegation zone and Luton hop out of it. I mean, potentially this is great news, isn't it, for Luton? I know it's just a point at the moment, but at the moment they know where they stand and they're out of the relegation zone. Ironically, that these two played each other at the weekend and played out a draw. I mean, obviously, I think it is good news for Luton. I'm sure, Luton are having a good season back in the Premier League. They don't want to stay in the Premier League because other clubs around them are being deducted points. But having said that, they would take that. I think that if that's the reason they're going to remain a Premier League club, make no bones about it, they'll accept that. I just feel a little bit uncomfortable looking at league tables with asterisks on them. I just think the league table is the league table. It should reflect what happens on the pitch. If you're going to sanction clubs for breaking financial rules, personally, I think it makes more sense to hit them with substantial fines. I know that's happened sometimes to clubs in the EFL as well. I just think once you start deducting points and people start appealing, it just makes a mockery of a table, doesn't it? Yeah, somebody, I think today, Daniel Taylor from The Athletic today, he described it as organised chaos, or what is happening in the bottom half of the Premier League at the moment. And I think we could have a much bigger debate as well about these spending rules, because a lot of people in football will tell you these rules are not fit for purpose. You know, they were brought through in a rush. They weren't necessarily thought through enough. And we've seen that they're not working, they're not fit for purpose, which is why so many Premier League clubs want them replaced as soon as possible.